what we are saying in Sri Vidya, I am the one who gives you both bhoga and moksha. I am the one who binds you and I am the one who will release you.
Like you said that, she is play, right? Almost like Maya.
True.
Right. So how come Maya helps us pierce through Maya?
Mathematics of the universe finds a drawing in the Sri Yantra.
Worshipping Lalita Tripur Sundari or, all the practices of Sri Vidya, it is so scientific. And you also said somewhere that where quantum physics and Sri Vidya begin.
And that's when you become that manifestation machine. There are only two reasons why you're on this path. One is you're Swayam Shiva himself, or you have done so much punya in your previous lives that you are getting the permission to chant her name in this janma, and this will lead you only straight to moksha. Going on the path of Sri Vidya is going to make your life easy. Then drop that thought immediately because it's going to be tremendously more difficult. At Pralaya, right, at that moment of Laya, which is dissolution, Shiva swallows the entire universe. But with Shiva still there, creation still exists. It's when Kali devours Shiva that dissolution is complete.
Hi everyone, welcome to Uncharted Conversations. I'm your host Natasha Singh, and the topic today we have. It's very interesting because, even I didn't know about what Sri Vidya is. We're going to talk about Sri Vidya. We're going to talk about Lalita Tripur Sundari. What I always knew is that Lalita Tripur Sundari is one of the 10 Mahavidyas, but I never knew in depth about what Sri Vidya is and what potential it has. The kind of potential it has to change your life. I never knew about it unless I encountered this guest of ours, and I can't tell you how excited I am to bring this topic to all of you. I can only say that this is Ma's blessing that we are doing this today. We have her, and I really, really hope that everyone who listens to this podcast, your lives are impacted in a great way. So let's begin the conversation. Shri Matre Namaha, Vinita
Shri
ji.
Matre Namaha.
Welcome to Uncharted Conversations, and absolutely thrilled to have you and host this episode with you.
Thank you so much. It's my delight and pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me here.
So let's dive into the conversation straight away. Would you like to have a little invocation before that?
Let me start with a small invocation. Om Shuklam Varadaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vignopashante. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Aim Hreem Shreem Aim Kleem Sau Shri Matre Namaha.
Interesting. Thank you so much for this beautiful prayer. And let's start with understanding Lalita Tripur Sundari, because I feel that, every goddess that we speak of, every deity that we speak of, they are an archetype of a particular trait. So my understanding is that when we meditate on them, it's basically I'm also kind of invoking that trait in me, right? And I have a theory that I think it's so vital to fall in love with the deity that you're worshipping. And that makes it equally important to know them, right? So tell us about the glory of Lalita Tripur Sundari, what she's all about, what she does. Tell us everything about her.
You're absolutely right when you spoke about falling in love with the Devi or with the Devata of your choice. This is the reason why we call them our Ishta Devata. So essentially we have to understand that we speak of three kind of Devatas who are very important, the role that they play in our lives. The first is your Kula Devata, which is what is essentially in your DNA. It comes down to you from your ancestors, through your forefathers. And then you have the Grama Devata, who is the god or the deity which is worshipped in the region that you live in or in the city that you live in. And then the final one, you don't have much choice about your Kula Devata and your Grama Devata. So the only choice that you make is with your Ishta Devata. And a lot of people ask, how do we know what our Ishta Devata is? Your Ishta Devata will call out to you through experiences. And you will realize who your Ishta Devata is when it is their name that comes to your mind when you're going through something very difficult or something very beautiful.
Even if I have not heard of them.
Even if you have never heard of them. And that is what determines who your Ishta Devata is. And in our tradition of Sri Vidya, our Ishta Devata is Lalita Tripura Sundari. So Lalita means the playful one.
Okay.
So what it means essentially is that all of this life is just a play.
Maya.
It's just fun. You have to reach it in a state of spontaneity. You can't take anything too seriously, because there she is telling you life is all just fun and games. And here we are taking everything so personally and so seriously. So the first message she gives to us is that of playfulness. And the second name is Tripura, which refers to all the triads that exist in Sanatana, starting from the 3 states, waking, sleeping, dreaming, or you can even look at it as time itself, past, present, future, or Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. So any of the triads. So she is the presiding deity of all the triads. See how powerful she is right there?
Yeah. So she presides over Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh as well.
Absolutely. In the Lalita Sahasranama, she is called Pancha Preta Sanasina, which means she's sitting on the corpses of all of these 5 gods, including Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, and Sadashiva. That's how powerful she is. And that is the Shakti that we are invoking when we talk of Sri Vidya. And then the final word, Sundari, which means not just some beauty, not just physical beauty. Her beauty is something which is transcendent, and that which envelops all the 3 states of being, the 3 states of time. So this is Lalita Tripura Sundari encapsulated. And then we always see her as, we see her in different forms, as Bala Tripura Sundari when she's just a 9-year-old, and then as Shodashi when she's a 16-year-old girl, just coming into full form as a woman, and then a little older version, when she's a Bhairavi at 30. So she goes through all these stages just like you and I as women go through all these various phases in our life, going from childhood into adulthood and thereon.
So Sri Vidya is basically when we are practicing or when we are worshipping Lalita Tripura Sundari, that practice is called Sri Vidya, and it's a subset of Tantra.
That's correct.
Right? But this is, because I've heard you often talking about it, that this form of Tantra is almost Vedic and not the fierce form of Tantra.
True.
Right?
This is what is called the Samayachara, which means that it is the very right-handed path of Tantra. So you're right in saying that it's very close to the Vedic methodology. And what we are saying in Sri Vidya, if I had to put it in a single line, what we talk of as the elevator pitch, it's that I will seek Ashraya with no one. Because Shri comes from the word Ashraya, which means shelter. I will seek Ashraya with no one because she is giving me shelter. So when she is giving me shelter, she's the mother of all. I don't need validation. I don't need love. I don't need anything from anyone else. That's it, right? So I seek Ashraya with no one has to be the message that we internalize as Sri Vidya sadhakas. And the second thing is that I will offer Ashraya to anyone who needs it. Because we have become an embodiment of her now. And she lives in our heart, in our Hridaya Guha. So then when she is offering us Ashraya, we become that umbrella for everyone else who reaches out to us.
A channel for her to provide that Ashraya to everyone else.
True.
Right? Interesting. So basically she is the divine feminine. And when we are worshipping her, we are also invoking her in us. Right? So how does it look like? What kind of changes or, what all does she help in once you have started to practice Sri Vidya? How will it manifest?
It says in the Vamakeshwara Tantra that Devi says, these are her words. She says, I am the one who gives you both bhoga and moksha. I am the one who binds you and I am the one who will release you. So this is what she can promise. That while you're here, you're in this body, enjoy everything, because then this body becomes your tool for emancipation.
So whether it's health, whether it's abundance, whether it's a great relationship, it will manifest. Once I've started to worship her, it will start to manifest in a way that, I would start to have all of these at its peak, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, you will be enriched in every aspect of life.
But that's interesting because um, she is considered, like you said, that, she is play, right? Almost like Maya.
True.
Right. So how come Maya helps us pierce through Maya? Like, this is so interesting.
It's because the whole point is this, that Maya doesn't mean that what we are going through is an illusion. It means we are only separating ourselves from her when everything that you need is already available to you. So that is the Maya that you're not able to pierce through.
I don't get it.
So
Explain it. This sounds very
effectively,
profound.
it means that everything that you seek is already yours. That's why your mind has even gone to that thought. So the illusion is not that this Maya, this world around us does not exist. It means don't see yourself as distinct from
Separation.
everything around you. So that is why the entire Srividya path is based on the philosophy of Advaita. There is no two, Advaita. No, there is no duality. It's non-duality. So what does this mean? You are the co-creator of whatever it is that you are desiring.
So, okay, now I'm understanding it a bit. So we are saying that from the state of being I want it to the state of being I am.
Exactly.
So when you reach I am, because when you realize that, ye bhi main hu, ye bhi main hu, ye bhi main hu, I think that's when you become one with the consciousness, because that's what consciousness is all about.
And then you start to co-create whatever it is that you want. You then become a co-creator of your own destiny. Much as we all start with the prarabdha karma, once we pierce the matrix, we understand, we've cracked the code. Now we've become manifestors. Because the thought has come to us. Why is it that a certain thought comes only to you and not to anyone else? It's because already the process has begun wherein you can fulfill that process, right? That dream or that manifestation.
So it's almost like that I also start to mirror myself in a way that I'm also the consciousness. And that's where I think I let go of that I want it, because I realize that I'm already it. And that's where you kind of separate from Maya, not in the exact term of separation, right?
You identify that this is the illusion that I'm living under.
That I want it.
The veil is removed and you go from a space of lack. So because the moment you say, I want, it means you don't have it.
You don't have it, exactly.
And the moment you realize that, oh, this is me. This thought came to me through my vritti, through my vasana.
So I am. How beautiful. Okay, so teach me like a 5-year-old kid, right? I'm an absolute novice in this, that how does a beginner, because I realize that there are 3 pillars to Srividya. That's mantra, yantra, and mudra, right? So teach me like a 5-year-old kid, that someone who's beginning on this journey, how should they start practicing a mantra, yantra, and mudra, and how do we mature into it, and how do we even know that I need to now mature into it?
Right.
Yeah.
First of all, to be a sincere practitioner of Srividya, there are a couple of things that we have to think of as the base, right? The first is a certain degree of spontaneity. In Sanskrit, we call this sahaja, bringing in a certain amount of just being spontaneous in your actions. That's the first thing. The second thing is to have a feeling of prema, of love, of bhava towards Lalita. And this will apply at the level of the yantra, the mantra, and the mudra. So at all points of time, this is about coming to her with spontaneity and with love.
So even before I start practicing, my eligibility criteria is that I need to be a little spontaneous and I need to treat everything with the bhav of love, right?
That's right. Especially anything related to your practice, and deal with everyone around you, everything around you with karuna, with empathy, or, with like abundant how does one say mercy, as it were, right? Because in Lalita Sahasranama, she is called Avyaja Karuna Murti, or she's like Karuna Rasa Sagara. So we have to somewhere reflect a little bit of that. And in our daily interactions with people, just be a little more gracious.
Consciously.
Very consciously, a little more gracious, a little more pleasing in your interactions, and never throw things around. Everything is a graceful movement. This is a prerequisite. Because if you're just going to be angry and irritable and just nasty to everyone, and you think you're going to be a good Sri Vidya sadhaka, it's never going to happen. So, sahaja, prema, and karuna. So you start on the basic premise, and this becomes your everyday life. And then you go into the yantra. The yantra, of course, is the Sri Chakra yantra, which is a very complex geometric pattern, which is said to mirror both the microcosm as well as the macrocosm. So when we talk of the microcosm, it could be at the atomic level, and the macrocosm, we are actually talking of the universe itself. So it could be a reflection of both of these. So this becomes very important in our practice to just meditate upon the Sri Yantra. The mantra practice starts with a very simple mantra japa of the Bala Tripura Sundari mantra, which is like the entry into the portal of Sri Vidya, where we are kind of harnessing the energy of the 9-year-old Bala Tripura Sundari. So it's just 3 bijas. Aim, Kleem, Sau.
Aim, Kleem, Sau.
Yes. Aim harnesses the energy of Saraswati, because in our entire tradition of Sanatana, it is knowledge which is paramount. Knowledge is what can lead us from, whether it's Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. So it's always knowledge which takes us from darkness to light. So the first bija in Sri Vidya is Aim, which is harnessing Saraswati.
Right.
Kleem is the energy of Kali. And why do we need Kali here in this equation? It's because Kali brings about a degree of fearlessness. And for all Shakti sadhakas, for all of us to move in life, we need to bring in an element of letting go of what we are afraid of. And Sau, because Sau is the energy of Lakshmi, of abundance. And Sau means it is the connection to Mother Earth, because it is in Mother Earth that abundance resides. So whether it's the reserves of gold or silver or whatever it is, or even the crops that grow, it's all from Mother Earth. So it's Aim, Kleem, Sau. And so it starts here and it culminates in the Mahashodashi mantra, which is a 16-syllable mantra. It's a long process. Sri Vidya is not something that is a sprint. It's not a 100-meter run. It's a marathon. And it takes years and years and years to get there.
And how do we know that, now I need to level up and move to the other level?
That's why you need a guru at some point. So initially, it's like even in our schooling system, at the start of our academics, we have various teachers giving us a knowledge about different things. So your science teacher teaches you about physics and so on and so forth. But when you reach your PhD level, that's when you need a personal guide. So it's the same with Sri Vidya. So initially you can start off on your own, but because it's a Rahasya Paddhati, there are many things which may not be available to you in terms of the knowledge. So that's when you need a guru to give you that secret knowledge.
So there's no initiation as such in the start. We can start with these baby steps.
That's correct.
And when the calling comes, so this is also very interesting, because I feel, how does one know that I've reached the right authentic guru? Because, sometimes in a desperation to have all the knowledge about it and get into it, sometimes we end up knocking the wrong doors, I feel, right? So how do I ensure that I have met the right guru?
Sometimes the wrong doors may also give you the right answers.
Our founder always say that there are never bad gurus. They always
True.
tell you something.
That's right. At least you're learning what is wrong with them, perhaps, and then you move on. So it's okay. Just allow everything and approach everything with a degree of spontaneity, which we were talking about. And then also this element of karuna comes. that if someone has done wrong by you, even if it is a guru, let it go.
Maybe
And
that
then
is what she's trying to teach you.
that was the lesson. And then perhaps that will point you in the right direction. But in my experience, it's always that the guru will find you when the time is right. The message will come to you.
You spoke about these eligible factors right before. So I was just thinking, so in the morning, and it happened because I have been consuming a lot of your podcasts regarding Sri Vidya. And, we know that this is divine feminine that we are talking about. We are talking about the power of softness, right? So typically when I'm traveling, I'm so frustrated, right? Today, for a moment when something went wrong and I'm like, okay, maybe, I can also approach it with the power of softness, right? Maybe I can try do that. So even that thought, what I'm trying to say is that after watching all the podcasts that I have watched so far, even that thought never occurred to me. But today it just happened to that. Why am I always so fiery? Why can't I approach it with a bit more of, kindness and compassion and, look at it from that lens? And suddenly I realized that I was not getting angry at all. So I don't know, if that was kind of the nudge that I needed, but it was an interesting observation for me also. And when you spoke about the mantra, I think you have said it at many platforms that you should never practice mantras with the music because then it kind of takes away the meter that it should be said in, which doesn't generate those vibrations.
True. So let's begin with discussing a very important aspect where you have mantra japa as one aspect and you have all the stotras which are usually converted into songs. Mantra japa can only be done in the form of a regular chant in a certain meter. And the stotras are also in a certain chandas, which means there's a rhythm and the entire way in which it is to be chanted. So it's important to understand that these two are very disparate things. The mantra japa, which is largely made up of bijas.
Okay.
And the stotras, which are longer, like songs of praise. It can be just listing the attributes of a devata and all of that. So these are two different things. And for me, to just simplify it, I would say mantra japa is more important than the stotras because this would be like a meal that you're having. The stotras also help, but they're like the supplements that you take.
Okay.
So the main meal
is the bija
mantra.
And bija mantra, like we have lam vam for chakras, something
That's
as
correct.
short as that.
Yes, like I'm clean sau, for example.
Okay.
And as you go further in the tradition, you will learn some more powerful mantras, bijas, and bija doesn't necessarily have to be a single syllable. Sometimes it could be longer ones, right? And people ask, what is the meaning of a bija? A bija by itself does not have a meaning. It's only contextual. So when you put it in a certain context, that it acquires a meaning. So this we have to be very clear about, that on the one hand we have the mantra japa and on the other hand you have the stotras, the stutis, the kirtanas and all of that. So the bijas normally are never sung. It's only the stotras which are made into song form, I'm with music added, which like you said, I have been very much against. And I think anyone with any degree of understanding of how vibration works would agree. Because everything has a certain chandas. It is written by our learned rishis in a way in which we are harnessing optimally the energy, the vibration, the spanda, of a certain verse or a certain line.
Sure. So like you said, that Bij Mantra typically doesn't have a meaning, right? So that means that the meaning would depend on the intention that I set. Like, is it more of like what kind of sankalp that I'm taking? And do I need to even take a sankalp before I start my practice?
Sankalpa is only to set your intention, because it's very clear now, even with quantum physics and with the latest studies, that your intention is everything. So in our tradition, we always say, do a sankalpa for everything. Before you start a prayer, before you start a homa. It's just so that you clarify your own intentions. Then the universe knows what you want so that it can give it to you. And but coming back to the meaning of the bijas, they're only in context. So what I mean by that is, if I say it as in Bala Tripura Sundari mantra, it means I'm Kleem Sau in how I just explained it. But if you take Kleem out of here and then put it in Mahaganapati mantra, then although it remains similar in meaning that you are still harnessing Kali, it could be in another form there. So it depends on what context you're chanting it in.
Okay. So that means that even in the longer form mantras that we have, and irrespective, even if I take the Bija mantra, this is what I understand. This is more about the vibration it creates when I'm chanting it, because the vibration has that power to tune me into that frequency. And that's why, the whole divine feminine starts to kind of rise up within me.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. And that also happens with the long form mantras, right?
With the Shrutis and the Stotras and all of that? Yes. Because some of them, like the Lalita Trishati, if I have to give you an example, has the Panchadashi mantra, which is the most potent Sri Vidya mantra, but it is hidden within it. And you need a guru to kind of expand that for you. So you could chant the Trishati after you've been initiated into it, but you will not get the same result as only chanting the Panchadashi mantra. So you will get some result, some benefit, but so this is like, the most potent, because this is undiluted. So it's to the power of X. And this, when you chant it in the Trishati form, it's diluted, say, about 100 times. So which one is more powerful? You can decide for yourself.
And it also, I've heard that, it also kind of praises the traits that Ma has, right? Which again, I feel it's not to do with what we are saying. It's more to do with the breath, the way my breath falls, or the way the rhythm of my breath becomes when I'm chanting it, which again creates that vibration within my body, which helps to awaken the divine feminine. That's what I understood.
That, and also everything that we are chanting has some amount of pranayama in it automatically. It's naturally how it's done, how every mantra is written. So Lalita Sahasranama, for example, has the ability to actually cure you of certain medical ailments, simply because of this pranayama thing, and because it's also aligning all your energy systems. The entire chakra system is coming into a balance simply by you chanting it. Now, how that happens is because it's pranayama.
It's more, I feel this is more like, because I think even the ailments at physical form starts to manifest when there's disbalance between your Ida and Pingla.
True.
But the pranayama helps to balance it out. So when you balance it at the core level, even at the physical level, the manifestation would stop.
True.
Right. Okay. This is so beautiful. Like, every time I hear something like this, and I'm like, all the answers are within our body. Like, everything God has given us, and we still are not able to figure it out.
And strangely, in all the other traditions, we are always told to renounce everything related to this body. We are told, go into the Himalayas, wear fewer clothes, acquire fewer things. But here is one tradition which is saying just treat the body as a temple, give it all that it needs, give it, all the material things that you need, give it everything. Don't renounce anything, and still keep your eye on the goal of moksha, which I think is such a beautiful practice. And I find the unusual nature of this to be, for me, the most important thing about Sri Vidya.
Yeah. I want to ask you, I want you to expand on this. But before that I have a question that, then how does a beginner know that, how am I supposed to chant that Bij mantra? Like, what would be the right way, or what should be the right pranayama when I'm chanting it? Because I think most of the people feel that the mantra was ineffective is because we don't know the right way to chant. And especially when we don't even have a guru. So what would be the correct, how do I know?
Initially, to begin with, for the Bala Tripura Sundari mantra or for the Mahaganapati mantra, these are what are called prasiddha mantras. There's not too much, ritual attached to it. There's not, it can't do anything wrong, at least, in the sense that it doesn't bring much harm if it's mispronounced or mischanted. But with the bigger mantras, when you go into Panchadashi and Shodashi, all of these things that you're pointing out become very important. So Aim Kleem Sau, with it just being 3 bijas, there's very little you can do wrong. You don't really need a guru. And you say it, it doesn't really matter, because with 3 bijas, it's probably going to take you 3 seconds. So it's the possibility of something going wrong is very limited.
Now let's come to the Sri Chakra, the yantra, right? And I have heard you also explain Sri Chakra in all dimensions also, because I think according to dimensions, it changes, right? So if you can help us understand that what is Mahameru from that aspect,
Right.
and what are these 9 avarnas that we speak of when we speak of Sri Chakra?
Okay. So unidimensionally, when we talk of the Sri Yantra, it would just be that it's more of a very universal thing which exists in nature itself, everywhere in nature. Because again, I keep going back to quantum physics, because now everyone understands that universe is mathematics at work. So unidimensionally, we look around us and we see that everything is a reflection of the numbers of the Sri Yantra, the Fibonacci sequence. The 2-dimension version is when it is etched on either copper or gold or whatever it is. And important to remember here that the geometry has to be accurate, because there are many versions which may not be accurate. So when it's an art form, it's fine to not adhere to the exact geometry. But when you're meditating upon it or using it for worship, then it's absolutely essential that you stick with the accurate geometry. So the 2-dimensional is what is called a Bhrupastara, which is the etching or a drawing or even on stone carving. The 3-dimensional version is the Mahameru, which is literally if you were to draw it and then pull it up.
Okay.
Right? So in a 3-dimensional form, that is the Mahameru. Typically, it is done in Panchaloha, which is a mixture of 5 metals, and which is considered the most auspicious. And of course, there are also many people who have Sphatika, which is a crystal. I am a little wary of the crystal one, because I am yet to see very accurate Sri Yantras, because if it has to be carved, then with Sphatika, it's very difficult, because it's a delicate element. So I would say the Mahameru in Panchaloha is the ideal one. And it can be used for Kumkumarchane, for any of the rituals which are associated with Sri Vidya. The Mahameru is a good starting point.
And as a beginner, if I have to start meditating on it, is it important that I have to do its Pran Pratishtha at home, or I can just and am I even supposed to purchase it, or is it always gifted and given?
I would actually say it's better to buy your own Mahameru or the Bhrupastara after ensuring that the geometry is accurate. Because when someone gifts it to you, you don't have that much control over whether the geometry is right or wrong.
Right.
It's better to just buy one which is accurate, which has been validated by some Agama Shastra professor or someone who knows a little more. And in terms of Prana Pratishtha, you're chanting before it. You're doing a Lalita Sahasranama or you're doing a Bala Tripura Sundari Japa before it will automatically enliven it with the energy that you're trying to get it to carry.
Okay. So even if I'm just a beginner, I can still chant the Sahasranama so that it can purify and start with the practice?
That's correct.
Okay. And what are the 9 avarnas that we can see in Mahameru?
Okay, so we start with the outer, so let's put it like this. We are talking of the universal blueprint, right? So we start with a square. A square is the only shape where you can get all the 10 cardinal directions, literally, right? So you have north, south, east, west, northeast, southwest, etc., and top and bottom. So that's the square which encapsulates space. Then after that, you've got 3 concentric circles. So the first avarana is between the square and the 3 concentric circles. Now first, let's talk about what an avarana actually means. In Sanatana, we always talk of Srishti, Sthiti and Laya.
And what is that?
Srishti is creation,
Creation.
Sthiti is preservation, and Laya is dissolution.
Okay.
This is what we normally talk of. But actually, there are two more processes involved in creation. The fourth one is called Tirodhana, which is the falling of the veil, which, the illusion which the deity or, the universal intelligence brings before us so that we don't identify immediately with the divine. It's like I would draw a parallel with a video game where the creator of the video game puts these challenges before you. He doesn't make it easy for you at the outset. It's only when he sees that you have a degree of expertise that he will give you, more codes and, to crack it. So that's Tirodhana, that is the veil. And that is what we talk of when we are referring to the Avaranas. And how do you overcome the veils? How do you remove these veils, these 9 veils? It's by acquiring her anugraha, the grace, right? So the universal intelligence then says, okay, you're ready because now you've cracked the code, you've done the work that's required, you've overcome the challenges, and now I give you the grace to see beyond these veils. I lift these veils from your eyes. So that's anugraha. So then it's complete. Srishti, Sthiti, Laya, Tirodhana, anugraha. So now, these 9 avarnas that we are talking about, these are the 9 veils which are placed before us. Now, because this is very complex geometry, and talking about the Sri Yantra is an entire episode in itself, but just to give you an idea, when we are talking of the square, it's largely, we said it's about space. Now, space already exists. Then we come to time, which is a human construct.
Right.
And why 3 concentric circles? Because everything in the Sri Yantra has a meaning, a significance, and a purpose. So if they've put 3 concentric circles, it's for a certain reason. We were speaking about how we can experience time only as past, present, and future. And also that in the past, present, and future, we go through time as, being awake, asleep, or in the dream state. So that is the 3 concentric circles. So we've done space and we've done time. Now what is that one other aspect that makes life possible? It is causality, which in Sanatana we also call as karma. Now the second avarna is the 16 petals. Okay, the 16 lotal petals that you see. Now why 16? It's because you have your 5 karmendriyas, which are your 5 organs of action. You've got your 5 jnanendriyas.
Senses are we talking about?
Organs of action. Now I'm coming to senses.
Okay.
Right? 5 organs of the sense organs, which are called your jnanendriyas. So organs of action, organs of senses. So your sense organ tells your organ of action what to do. So your eyes are telling your hand, okay, pick up something. Right? So that's 10. What do these 10 work on? The Pancha Mahabhutas, which are the 10 elements that exist, which make up this universe. So from the grossest to the subtlest, earth, water, fire, air, and space, or ether. So that's 15. Now we come to the crux. What is that 16th aspect that, for Natasha, makes this experience of life your own? How you taste chocolate, for example, I will never know. How you're perceiving the color of your shirt is something that I can never understand. What feeling you have, what is evoked in your mind when you see something which is unfair, I will never understand that, much as you can try to put it in words. So this in quantum physics is called qualia. Qualia, Q-U-A-L-I-A, which is your sense of whatever is happening to you, your experience through your consciousness.
It's more like internalization of whatever
It's just your experience through consciousness.
Okay.
Right? Now, what is it that for you brings all of these 15 things together? It is your mind. It is your manas. Now, in Western psychology, we talk of mind as a very, fluid thing. It's just mind. But in Sanatana, we talk of mind as manas, buddhi, ahankara, and chitta. So manas is the lower mind, which is trying to keep you away from harm and which is telling you don't do this, don't do that. It's like the naysayer.
Actions.
Exactly. Then you have buddhi, which is more of the intellect. Then you have ahamkara, which is your sense of self. And then you've got chitta, which is the universal consciousness. So here, the 16th petal that we are talking about is actually just the manas, the lower mind. So it's all these 16 aspects which come together, which creates causality for you or for anyone. And then so on and so forth. So you go through the 16 petals, then you go to the 8 petals, which is more about overcoming all your physical, emotional, spiritual circumstances. And then you go into the various triangles. There are totally 43 triangles, right? So we go through all the avarnas until we reach the center, the bindu, which is Shiva Shaktyeka Rupini Lalitambika, where Shiva and Shakti take Eka Rupa in her form, Lalitambika. So the 9 avarnas, it's not necessary to go into the details because it's just very complex, right? But to understand that this is the process of evolution. You start with space, then you go through time, and then causality, and then into the everyday actions of our life, where we go through the various levels of consciousness. We get more and more and more evolved, where things like even manifestation and taking control of our health and well-being, and all of these are covered in these various avarnas until you come to the bindu.
Do these avarnas would differ according to if you're taking them in the sense of spirituality or in terms of the society or in terms of how it reflects in my physical body? Does it differ or is it the same?
The avarnas are closely related to the chakra system.
Chakras.
So the 7 chakras we are all familiar with.
Right.
So we start with the Sahasrara, which could actually be seen as the bindu. And then, so we know of 7 chakras. There are 2 more chakras which we factor in where the Shri Yantra is concerned, and that arises here. You have the Agnya chakra. So above that you have a Soma chakra and you have a Chandra chakra. So these 2. So if you notice a typical South Indian, they will have the bindi here, and then they will have something here, and then they will have another dot here. So you look at even Sri M, or look at Swami, Om Swami. So he has a bindu, and then he's got 2 dots, right? So those are the 2 chakras that you can immediately connect with. So that makes it a total of 9 chakras, which are correlated to the 9 avarnas.
So basically, each avarna is connected to
one chakra.
To one chakra.
And also the 9 apertures that we have in our body, the 9 orifices. So it could be related to any of that. And even if you look at it astrologically, it's the Navagraha. So it's all 9. So that's what's reflected there.
So then, does that mean that if I have a specific concern area, it can be related to my health, it can be related to my relationship, do I need to meditate on the same Shri Chakra? Or there are different kinds of...
No, there is only one Shri
There's
Chakra.
one Shri Chakra.
But you can meditate upon a specific avarna. So for example, if health is your main concern, the 7th avarna is the Sarva Rogahara Chakra. So you meditate upon that more than the others, and you will be able to then overcome whatever it is that you're struggling with.
And what is it for abundance, just in case if our audience...
So abundance is overall the entire Shri Chakra itself, but within that also the first 3 avarnas. The first 3 avarnas are more to do with your material needs. And after that, it becomes more subtle and it becomes more about your spiritual quest. So the first 3 avarnas, it's Sarva Saubhagya Dayaka.
So this is interesting. So basically, by meditating on the avarnas, I can actually balance my chakras.
Yes.
I've never heard this before. That's interesting and profound. Since we are talking about Shri Chakra, which is actually the sacred geometry that we speak of, right? It's literally how the cosmos were created. If I talk about the sacred geometry, I'm talking about that each and every creation that has ever been made, that is there and that will ever be made, right, would have the same structure, right? So, and that also reflects in our bodies. That also reflects in our DNA.
Yes.
Right. So, technically, Shri Chakra is actually the language of science. And when I'm looking into it, because this is what the creation is all about, I'm tuning myself with the frequency of creation. And that's why I feel that, I'm the creator and I'm the creation.
Absolutely. And since we are talking science, if you were looking at the Shri Yantra at this point of time, and I put you under the fMRI machine, what would I see? I would see that your brain is going into theta waves, and it is working on the higher aspects of the brain, such as the amygdala. And it's actually bringing about a consonance between your left and right brain, which is what is the most essential quality required for spiritual evolution.
Wow. So one Sri Chakra and it solves everything.
And why? Because even if you look at a flower, if you look at a sunflower, for example, or if you look at a snail, they all have to adhere to the golden ratio, the principle of Fibonacci. So the mathematics of the universe finds a drawing in the Sri Yantra. It's exactly the same thing that you will see in the Pyramid of Giza. Or yesterday someone mentioned to me that they were in Machu Picchu and they were amazed by the energy that they were feeling, which was very similar to the Shakti energy that they would feel in a Sannidhi in South India, in a temple.
And we were able to think of, of Sri Chakra, how many years back?
12,000 years ago.
12,000 years
When
ago.
it was recorded. Before that, I don't know for how many thousand years we have lived with this knowledge.
So now I feel that worshipping Lalita Tripur Sundari or, all the practices of Sri Vidya, it is so scientific. And you also said somewhere that where quantum physics end, Sri Vidya begins.
Exactly.
It blew away my mind when I heard that. So can you touch upon any one such thing which you think that the quantum physics, quantum science still has to discover, but is already at a very core level with Sri Vidya?
Quantum entanglement, you talk about that because we've already spoken about it in Sri Vidya. In all the Tantra texts, they talk about how time itself, sometimes it can even be negative. It can, there's no past and there's no future. They're very fluid. So even if you look at the double slit experiment, that is exactly what Sri Vidya has been talking about from 12,000 years ago, saying that everything is the observer. The electron, for example, is just sitting there waiting for the observer. And then it will determine whether it will become a wave or a particle, depending on the observer. So this is what we've been saying all along, that your consciousness creates what you want. So isn't that exactly the same thing?
Very off the record, but when we are observer, because what I've also know is that Shiva is the observer and Shakti is the observation.
Yes.
So when we become observer, we are kind of getting into the Shiva aspect. Is that so?
We are actually converging both at this point where the observer and the observation become one. Shiva Shakti Eka Rupini. And that's when you become that manifestation machine. And when I say manifestation machine, I don't mean it only for material desires, because that's just so, ordinary, common. Who wants that? After you reach a certain point in spirituality, gender doesn't exist. Time also becomes very illusory. And all the things that you felt were important just fall away by the wayside. It's like, now I've got greater goals. And now I've seen a glimpse of it and I want more of that. I don't want all these little common things which I was hankering after.
Because the wheel has been lifted.
True.
Nice. Okay, how does one know that, Ma really wants them to practice Sri Vidya?
I always say that Sri Vidya chooses you.
How does
you
one
could
know?
You could be under the illusion that you have chosen Sri Vidya, but even the tantric texts, whether it's the Vamakeshwara Tantra or the Rudrayamala Tantra, it says very clearly that there are only two reasons why you're on this path. One is your Swayam Shiva himself. Leave gender aside, because Shiva, we are talking about the tattva. It's not the physical aspects of Shiva. Or you have done so much punya in your previous lives that you are getting the permission to chant her name in this janma, and this will lead you only straight to moksha. There's nothing left after this.
Nice. But then how does one know? Like, how does Sri Vidya chooses you? How does Sri Vidya choose you?
How does one know? You will know it instinctively. It's just a visceral.
Dreams or-
It could be dreams. Although I've never dreamt of Devi.
Really?
Yeah, I know a lot of my followers. They talk about how I had this dream of Devi. I've never dreamt of her, but I think somewhere she makes herself known when she comes into your life. It could be in various ways. It could be that suddenly there is an awareness of something that was right before you. Some people suddenly discover that there's a Shri Yantra which they've had for 30 years, but they didn't know. They were, doing prayer to it. They had it in their puja room, and suddenly it becomes visible to them, and then they want to learn more. So there are different ways, and for each person, it's a different story, it's a different narrative, but somehow they will know, and instinctively you're drawn towards it. And from there, there's no looking back.
Does Sri Vidya also help in dissolving the karmic imprints? Does it kind of free us of the karma that we have done?
It burns up the karma, and that's the whole point of the practice, the sadhana. It accelerates your karma to a point where, because we are saying on the one hand that moksha is what is imminent for us, so it means that you have to burn up all your karma. So if you think that going on the path of Sri Vidya is going to make your life easy, then drop that thought immediately, because it's going to be tremendously more difficult, because it's acceleration of karma.
So everything that God planned actually to give you in many lifetimes, you'll be getting in this lifetime.
Exactly. And also a car going at 40, 50 kilometers per hour, there's still control. You are still able to slam the brakes if there's a pedestrian. But if that same car is going at 180, then very little control, right? Everything's just coming at you at that point, and you have to relinquish that control. So that sharanagati, that complete surrender to her, is what will actually protect you and save you. But I am not promising an easier life.
How has been your life ever since you started practicing Sri Vidya?
Full of challenges, also full of bliss, because I think what happens is that you develop an equanimity where you're saying, Ma, this is also your doing. So I accept with grace. Whatever it is that you're giving me, I know you're doing it with a reason, and it's because you're burning my karmas. Life becomes a tapasya, tapa.
Now it makes sense, because if it's burning your karma, then it also must ensure to give all the fruits, like good fruits of your karma in this lifetime.
Right.
That's the reason you're able to see that kind of abundance, that kind of, magnanimity that you always wished.
True.
So life is very oscillating between both the spectrums, right?
True.
Interesting. You also mentioned of that how in Sri Vidya, the philosophy says that, we treat our body as sacred temple. Are there any lesser known practices that activate certain glands, certain nerves, which helps us align our physiology with higher consciousness?
So number one is, of course, to ensure that all our energy channels remain activated and open. So that is your entire chakra system. So it's good to do some kind of chakra activity, which balances your chakras, removes any stagnation. Also tapping, as in EFT, the emotional freedom technique, that helps a lot to also bring in some aspects of tapping into your everyday practice. So while you're chanting, you could do the tapping, that kind of thing. So there are many ways of doing it, but the most prominent method still remains the chakra balancing. Because once your chakras are aligned, then there's just a lot better flow of energy, which helps you to keep this body in better condition. And of course, if you're also a practitioner of yoga, that helps. Meditation helps, because these are all practices which bring about a greater degree of alignment of the mind, body, and spirit.
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt you in middle of the podcast, but I also wanted to share with you that at New Yuk platform, if you're enjoying this spiritual conversation, we have other products as well. We have our on-demand pre-recorded courses, which are seeded in personal transformation. So whether you're looking for something like Vedic astrology or visualization for manifestation or using hypnotherapy to become more abundant in your life or just understanding ancestral healing, we have got pre-recorded programs on that. So if you're interested, we have given the link below to visit our website. Now I look at it, I find that, this whole system that has been in our culture for so long, it was literally like, ये kindergarten है, सब सीख लो, yoga भी है, pranayam भी है. Like prepare your mind and your body. This is more like preparing yourself before you start your sadhana. Who took it away? Like, why did kind of this information get lost?
Because we became very focused on only the yoga aspect or only the pranayama aspect. And we forgot that yoga in itself was Ashtanga, 8 limbs, right? We just started focusing on the asanas and to some extent on the pranayama. We forgot that it was a necessary preparation for dhyana, dharana, samadhi, pratyahara, all of that. And so in a way, we are also to blame because we allowed the West to kind of take it away from us and then present it in a way in which they found meaning.
Yeah,
and commercial meaning. But I think slowly it's coming back now. We are leading more wholesome, holistic lives, and we're going back to that model of Purnamada Purnamidam, right? And not even seeking validation, as we were talking about. More and more women are opening up to this belief in themselves and in understanding that we are complete to begin with. So there's nothing that can make us any more fulfilled than we already are. No amount of Botox, no amount of surgeries can really fill you up if you are already complete.
So true. You're one example of that. Okay. We spoke of that how it accelerates spirituality. Would you also like to inform people of the possible dangers? Can there be any pitfalls while one is walking on this path? What can go wrong?
With any spiritual path for that matter, there are a couple of things that we have to be really cautious about and watchful watch out for rather. So the first thing is that the ego tends to become very inflated because we think that we know a little more. We have also now, when you're on the path of Sri Vidya, you start to manifest and you see that if you really wish someone ill, then they're going through something.
That can happen?
Yeah, because if positivity can be manifested, then most certainly you can manifest the negative as well, right?
But then how it will burn up my karma if I manifest
That's
that?
the point I'm trying to make, that you have to be very cautious of what your intention is. Because in a moment, it takes for us to lose our cool and to curse someone. We've done so much damage that we have to go back to, literally square one. So don't allow that to happen. So that's why we have to watch out for ego inflation. And if you notice, even with all the spiritual gurus who've really reached a certain height, they've reached there, but then what have they done with it? Ended up in prison most often because of the ego. It's like, I'm invincible. And that is also a test. It's a challenge. So remain very conscious, aware, mindful of what your ego is telling you. You approach this whole thing with humility, not arrogance. Number 2 is that there is always a possibility that there could be, the energy in your body can be very misaligned when you start these major practices. So that's why we always say have someone at hand who knows a little more, like a guru, so that your energy does not get misaligned or mismatched. And that can lead to a lot of difficulties on the physical front or a mental imbalance. So we want to stay away from these two things. And the third danger is that you have to integrate well with the entire structure, of your practice. If there is no integration, then if you're trying to do something in isolation, it's not going to give you any results. And it's just going to be an exercise in futility. So if these three things you can just watch out for, then I think you're pretty much covered.
Tell me, how does a married couple can practice Sri Vidya? Like, does it differ in terms of how they practice? Like, is there any utilization of their sexual energy which can actually help them practice this path better?
In my understanding, typically, I would advise that only one person in the family do Sri Vidya. And because we've spoken before that this is a very secret tradition, it is said that even your closest family members need not know that you're on the path. But I've seen a few couples where they have jointly gone into Sri Vidya, and I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, but they've chosen the route of celibacy. But there are, in Tantra, we have a lot of, there's a lot of talk about Maithuna, which is to use the sexual energy, but it's not for pleasure, but to go beyond that, to transcend the pleasure and to convert even that into a spiritual sadhana, but which is very difficult to practice because we all tend to get caught at that, the level of sensuality. So I would say if it's a couple practicing, just do your practices separately and don't bring in aspects of the left-handed path, which is, of the Vamachara, because then you're just making a mess of everything. Because you can't, be bringing in very many elements and confusing the issue for everyone at hand.
Yeah, okay, interesting. It is also said that in Sri Vidya, the practitioners happen to access sound frequencies which can alter the state of consciousness, right? What are these sound frequencies?
Essentially, what happens when you start chanting the Bija mantras is that you suddenly have an access to something because nada, the sound itself, is what brought creation into being. So with the Bijas, you are able to harness that, the power of nada. Also, because as you become a more sincere sadhaka, your vak shakti, that is your ability to communicate, becomes clearer. You become more pure in everything that is said. Because again, in Sanatana, vak has 4, different stages. There's para, pashyanti, madhyama, and then vaikhari. So this reminds us of the importance of the spoken word. Which brings me to a very interesting discussion we were having before that, today we have social media, everyone has access to it, and there are some astrologers who just for their own personal aggrandizement are saying that such and such a person has a short life, or so and so couple are going to go through a divorce and all of that. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a classic example of how you are misusing the power of vak. And this does nobody any good, and it can do a lot of damage because that is the biggest kind of karma that you're going to carry with you.
Sri Vidya, or maybe meditating on Sri Chakra, is also said to activate our DNA, right? And scientists have now started to say that your DNA is a very intelligent language system. So then every visualization that we are doing, every mantra that we are chanting, then does it become like an instruction for the DNA, which also helps to kind of awaken it or take it to its full potential?
It's epigenetics at best, where there is some genetic material which is getting transformed, but it starts in your neural pathways. And this takes us back to that fMRI machine, where we see that neural activity is heightened in the higher regions of the brain, which are to do with spiritual growth and evolution. So when we are talking about the pineal gland, for example, it means that there is something happening at the level of the genes itself in your DNA. So perhaps there is some, the chromosomal level, improvements are being made, and even the telomeres, the length of the telomeres can be altered by meditation, by just merely looking at the yantra. So yes, there's a lot more than meets the eye.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard you speaking somewhere that just meditating on it, you have heard stories where people have recovered from like really life-threatening ailments as well.
Yes, and
That also makes sense now that the DNA is kind of getting restored, repaired.
true, replenished perhaps. And Sri Yantra is not exclusive to Sanatana, because recently I had a session with a gentleman who was going to Peru for a shamanic, to do an ayahuasca ritual. And the moment he entered the tent, the first thing he saw there was a huge Sri Yantra on the wall. And he said, what are the chances in South America to see the Sri Yantra? But then it's understandable because it's such a universal symbol. It's, one of those archetypes that Jung used to talk about, the unconscious archetypes, right? So it has not only related to our culture, but in all cultures. And people who may never have heard of Sanatana in their lives, when they're going under anesthesia, they see this drawing and they don't know what it is. And then later when they see the Sri Yantra, they're like, oh, this is what I saw when I was going under or when I was coming into consciousness. And there are a lot of people, there's one gentleman in America in the hills of Montana who's making the Sri Yantra and allowing the snow, in a tetrahedron form so that the snow becomes a part of the triangles. And it's an amazing experiment that he's doing. And so there's a lot of work happening which may not come out in the open because these people like to do it quietly and reap the benefits of whatever it is that they're experimenting with.
In fact, I heard you somewhere that in Oregon also,
Yes,
the whole, that shape of the land
yes.
turned out to be in the form of Sri Chakra.
No, it was a drawing of the Sri Chakra which appeared, and there were speculations that it might be a UFO because it's not possible even for us to just try to draw the Sri Yantra on a small scale is very, very difficult. And for someone to carry it out on a large plot of land and, over acres, nobody understood how it was done. Till today, there's a lot of speculation as to whether it was UFO activity or how it appeared. But one thing they know is that that land became very fertile.
And it was an infertile land.
Yes, it was a desert. Oregon, I think, has some, desert parts. But I can vouch for this because I have a small little bamboo which grows next to my Sri Yantra. I bought two at the same time to just test this out. So I kept one away and one very close to the Yantra. The one which is near the Yantra is almost double in height to the one which I've kept inside. And you can try this out for yourself. Yeah. And there have been Russian scientists who've even spoken about how it helps with germination. So the seed which germinates in front of a Sri Yantra has a much longer, that the sprout or whatever it's called, like at least 2 times longer.
It's like reminding the germinating seed about creation. It's like that. How beautiful. Okay. It also spoke about, I think one of the core philosophies is the union of Shiva and Shakti.
That's right.
Right. Which I feel we can also have a sneak peek of it in our DNA because of the double helix structure.
That's right.
It's like, the Shiva and Shakti, the two opposing forces, but living in harmony. Right. Do you think that is also kind of derived from there?
So it's the Ida and the Pingala going around the Sushumna and then coming together at the Sahasrara. And so Shiva and Shakti, essentially, if you look at it, Shiva is eternal consciousness and Shakti is the kinetic energy. And one cannot exist without the other because what will consciousness do without something activating it? So Shiva is veritably Shava without Shakti, without the energy. And what will Shakti do if there is no embodiment for her to do her job of, bringing this energy to some kind of conclusive result? So yes, indeed, Shiva and Shakti are all there is in this universe, and their union, which we can talk of in a variety of ways, but eventually it only just means that Prakasha Vimarsha, Prakriti, all of that is just one thing that Purusha and Prakriti, all of it has to come together.
How does it reflect in day-to-day life when the Shiv and Shakti meets? Like, for example, if I'm able to balance that, and if I reach there where I feel that the Shiv and Shakti within me is in union, how would it start to reflect in my daily life? What all would change for me?
You would see a greater degree of equanimity that you approach everything with. So it's almost like even when you're going through the most turbulent times, you develop a witness consciousness where you're able to step outside your own experience and say, okay, I'm just a third party looking at this. Let me not get attached to the outcome. Let me not force this in any way. That's one of the primary things that happens when Shiva and Shakti align, when that orientation happens. Apart from that, you will feel better physically, mentally, spiritually, where because of the same, the factor of realignment, everything just feels so much easier and less heavy. Because normally in life, we go through every day feeling a certain degree of load, burden. So that falls away and you just feel lighter, you feel more comfortable in your own being. And I think the most important thing is you start seeing that what you want comes to you without too much effort.
Yeah, and that's where we need to check our egos, right? Nice. It is Sri Vidya is also said to be the path of householder because I think I was very excited when I read that in Sri Vidya's philosophy it said that desire in itself is sacred,
Yes.
which automatically makes it the householder's path.
True.
Right. Now, from that perspective, does it help if someone is in matrimony and both the partners have the same desire? Will it help with it? Will it accelerate if they are setting the same kind of intention?
Perhaps it will, or perhaps it can drive a wedge between them, because it's very rare for any two humans, because we are all born with our own prarabdha karmas, and then nurturing is so different. Perhaps there might be a rare couple whose paths are really so well aligned, and that they become veritably Shiva Shakti themselves. It's a possibility for sure.
But if it says that desire is sacred in itself, then we are also talking about unhealthy desires.
So we talk of kama, right? Desire, which with Sri Vidya gets converted to prema, which is love. So desire is not wrong, but when you change how you approach it and you relate it to something as positive as love or prema or karuna or any of the positive energies that you feel, then finally it brings you to a point where you find that balance.
So tell me in this, because we say that, this is the age of Shakti, right? We're literally living in the age of Shakti. And with all the practices wherein we are going back to divine feminine, how it's going to pan out? Because it's like, the earth and the whole universe is already supporting it, as this is right now the essence of Shakti. And now we are also doing everything in a capacity to worship and to practice it. How's it going to pan out?
In our lifetimes, I don't think it's going to make a difference, because this is going to be a very long route, just like how we talk about how Sri Vidya is not like a shortcut. So much as we say that Shakti is on the rise, do you really see it? Look around you. It's not visible anywhere. But what will happen is that change comes about at an individual level. We're not talking about change at a community level yet. That might be some time in the making. But for women, this is a very good time to assert themselves, but not by becoming more masculine, not by embracing hyper-masculinity, but actually going into themselves and kind of harnessing the feminine energy within them and realizing that they are complete as they are, and not pandering to what society wants them to be. I think that is the biggest, most important lesson that Shakti has for us today. That don't always, see, it's not that we want to rebel, right? But it's just that we accept ourselves for who we are. Then half the problem is solved. Because if we are trying to be something else that we are not, that's when all of it gets botched up. Whether it's a cosmetic surgery or whether it's something, as basic as wearing a manly suit to work, right? You don't have to adhere to what society is telling you to. Just be authentic to your own self. Just stick with what your intuition is telling you. So today, if you feel like dressing feminine, wearing bangles, doing whatever it is, just do it without thinking, I'm going to be perceived as being this behenji type or whatever it is. Because this is how we live. And then if you just don't want to show, you don't have to do a costume drama every day. I faced a lot of flack because when I went on some of the podcasts, I went without a bindi and without all of that. And I was like, this is who I am. And I continue to be a sadhaka, regardless of whether I'm clad in a certain thing. I'm not wearing rudraksh. I'm not going to do all of that. Because it's all antarmukha samaradhya bahirmukha sudurlabha. Which means everything you do on the outside is irrelevant. Ultimately, it's what you internalize that is going to count towards your spiritual journey.
So true. So if you can help us understand, because we talk a lot about divine feminine, but I think it's so much, of course we have glorified and it is very sacred also, but I feel we will not be able to reach that point until we understand what exactly is divine feminine, right? What exactly is the trait of divine feminine? How does it look like?
It's just purely bringing more of the love element. It is listening to your Anahata Chakra. That's all the divine element means. Because if you look at a mother, when we talk of the divine feminine, it's the archetype of the mother. Okay? So it doesn't mean you always have to be soft. That's another misconception that we have to be little wary of. Because a mother is most benevolent. She will give everything to her child. But the moment her child is in danger, you will see a fierceness in her which you cannot imagine existed. So you can be anywhere on that spectrum, right? From real softness, what is called Saumya, to ultimately the Ugra version of Kali. Because remember what Kali stands for. Kali means, why is she called Kali? Because she devours Kala itself. So at Pralaya, right, at that moment of Laya, which is dissolution, Shiva swallows the entire universe. But with Shiva still there, creation still exists. It's when Kali devours Shiva that dissolution is complete. Because then only energy remains.
So I always thought that, Shiva would always be there. But now when I hear from this angle...
He's Prakriti, right? So if Prakriti exists, then everything is in existence.
But isn't Shakti Prakriti?
It's Purusha and Prakriti. Both of them have to exist in, together.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like the energy has to be the only thing left. So there's nothing left of the physical dimension.
Like no observer, just the energy.
That's right.
How do I, because even if I go, all aggressive and fiery, how does one know the difference that I'm still in my divine feminine element, even if I'm getting angry, or now this is me pampering and soothing my human trait?
Anger is always a secondary emotion. It never can be a primary emotion. It is based off on something else. So when anger is righteous, in the sense that you see an injustice being done, it's very necessary anger. And we see this again and again in Sanatana, where even our most beloved rishis, even our most well-known gods, are all seen angry, they're cursing, all of that. So there's a purpose. There is something called a divine sacred rage. And we talk of this specifically with reference to Shakti. Because a woman's anger is actually being kicked off by something else. It's the situation. Or it's that some boundary has been crossed which should not have been.
So because we spoke about the divine feminine Shakti, that means that if I can't reach Shiva until and unless I invoke Shakti. Is that so?
Or the other way around also. There are many Shiva practitioners who are then directed towards Shakti, because you can't reach one without the other. So if you're on the Shakti path, you will be called upon to do some Shiva sadhana at some point. And the same holds good for those who are doing Shiva sadhana, and they are told to incorporate some aspect of Shakti in their worship so that it's complete.
So since we were talking about, how Sri Vidya is actually a householder's path, how does it become a householder path? Because you also mentioned that it should be so secretive that not many people in your circle should know about
That's
it, right? So how do I maintain that balance?
So when we say a householder's path, in the Vedic methodology, it's always about renunciation. It's always about leaving your house and leaving your family and going away and becoming a yogi, or, that kind of thing. In Sri Vidya, what we are told is you stay within the parameters of your social setup, within your family as a grihastha. You could be a husband, you could be a, the father, son, whatever, or the same for woman as well. She carries out all her roles which society imposes upon her, and at the same time continues to do a practice towards moksha. So that is what we mean when we say it's a householder practice. It doesn't mean that you incorporate your entire family into the practice. It's just a grihastha who can do this practice. As opposed to in the Vedic system, there were very few people who were allowed to do the homas, right? It was always the Brahmins who would do the homas, and there would be one person, the Yajamana, who would order these homas done. So now with Sri Vidya or with any Tantra practice, it became more heterodox. There was none of that orthodoxy which you saw in the Vedic system. And it became more commonly available to everyone. So that is what it means when we talk of grihastha.
Sure. And so, for example, one of the partners is practicing Sri Vidya. Right now, I'm assuming that when you start to walk on that path, of course, there would be a lot of maturity. There would be a lot of spiritual maturity as well. Do you think at that point of time, you've outgrown your partner? And then, how do you be in that marriage where it's like, I can see a lot of things, I know a lot of things, but I still have to be here, function from, this lens.
That's where you have to bring in that the deflation of your ego, because the person might not be a Sri Vidya sadhaka, your partner, but he has every right to exist and to enjoy his own life just as much as you do. You don't have some special right simply because you're a Sri Vidya sadhaka. And you have to be very aware of this, that every single being in your presence is also equally divine. You are practicing something which is for your own good, which may take you down the path of evolution, but they also have just the same amount of rights as far as life goes. And the same degree of respect, the same degree of value for every single human being, regardless of who they are or what they're at.
I think you put it very beautifully, because I've heard a lot of people when they say that, you should be compassionate and it's their journey. And I feel the moment you say that, you have already decided the power dynamics. You're already saying that I know a lot, but I have to be compassionate. Wherein then it's not you're not giving the equal status to your partner. You're like, it's their journey. They would evolve. I'm just there, I'm kind of supporting. Wherein even if you've started to walk that path and you've got mature, I really like that you said that you still have to look at your partner in an equal way. Not that it's their journey, I'm giving them space, they'll figure it out. No, then I think you've really taken the power, right?
And also a lot of people say, I've forgiven. Who are we to forgive?
The creator.
If we take up the role of creator, then what is his or her role? And this is something that I always have to bring to the notice of many people, even during a session when they say, I have forgiven. I'm like, you are not forgiving anyone anything. They are on their own journey. They have to go through everything. And it is ultimately the universal law that determines forgiveness or not. We are no one to even say those words.
So then how do I look at forgiveness then? Because now, I mean, I totally understand your point, because the moment you say, no, I've forgiven, again, you're saying that I'm being the bigger person.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Then how do I deal with it? Like, what's the word then I should put to it?
First of all, we have to stop taking everything personally. That is the most important thing. This is everything that happens to us is not about us. If someone has done something, it is because they were led to that situation. You had nothing to do with it. You were just the recipient of it at that point of time. So if you look at it from that lens, then a lot of this riffraff will fall away and you will realize that, okay, it happened now. It's in the past. Now let's move on. Let's not talk of, me being the bigger person and bringing forgiveness into the picture and acting like, I'm sitting on this high horse and you owe me something. No.
I feel now when you talk like that, I feel then practicing Sri Vidya is actually the biggest fight is duality, because imagine that now a lot of wheels have been lifted. You know so much, but then you also know that I'm one with the consciousness, and then there is no separation. But then something happens to you, it's like no, no, no. I don't stand here to forgive the person, because it's like, how can things happen to the creator? You're getting my point, that it is so much of duality involved, and I think that's the
you have
whole
to rise
fight.
above the duality, because then you recognize that the one who is creating this difficult situation for you is also a part of that same substratum where you are coming from. So there's really no difference. And so no question of forgiveness, there's no question of anger. All you have to do is just witness it silently and just acquiesce to the situation. That
I think the right way would be that person is also creator.
True.
Right? True. Because I feel, imagine I suddenly start feeling like I'm the creator, and then something happens to me and I'm like, oh, now how am I supposed to function? Right? You also spoke of that in the Mahameru, how once you cross all the 9 avarnas, there lies the point, the bindu that we speak of, which is basically the infinite divine, right? Would you like to expand on that? What is it? And once, if one reached there, like, what is it to be there?
It's a dot, essentially.
Yeah.
And a dot would mean the singularity. You've reached the singularity. And there's nothing beyond, there's nothing above, there's nothing below. And at that point, all of it comes together for you to realize that this is what we were meant to be here for, to understand the message of love, of bringing together Shiva and Shakti. And that's what the Bindu stands for. Because it's just a single point of bringing everything in the universe together, of the whole of creation to come together in that one point of singularity.
So basically, God sent us here as His very conscious creation. We get into duality, and then we keep coming and going and coming and going to just keep learning and unlearning the whole concept of duality to ultimately.
We don't get into duality. We are just living in the illusion of the dual world.
Yes.
To overcome the illusion of duality to reach the singularity.
Yeah, because it's a wheel. Yeah, the choice of words, it just completely changes the meaning.
And that's why you start the meditation on the outer periphery of the Sri Yantra, and then slowly come inward as you purify your bodily impulses, your emotional impulses, and finally your spiritual impulses to reach this point of singularity.
So when we are starting, we need to meditate on the outer square you talked
about.
From
the outer square inward, use a circular movement like the clockwise direction and go through all the aspects of the Sri Yantra. So starting with the square into the 3 concentric circles, then into the petals, and then into all the 43 triangles until you reach the Bindu. That's the way you meditate upon it. So for some people, they like to do it several times. For others, they like to just do it slowly and reach the Bindu after 2.5 minutes. Both work. All of this is essentially that you have to understand work at the neural level. It's clearing your neural pathways, it's rewiring your brain, there's neuroplasticity at work. So that is what we are trying to do.
So Sri Vidya is also the tool for neuroplasticity and clearing your neural pathways, right?
It is, in fact, not a tool. It's as a practice. It's just trying to clear all patterns which have existed until now and replace it with the Shri Yantra, with the blueprint of the Shri Yantra. So whether it's, in your neural pathways, whether it's in the way you approach, from your heart with your chakras, all of it, you're internalizing this universal intelligence and making it your own.
So it basically works at all the levels. Like you said, I think at the brain level, this is more like clearing all the neural pathways. At energy level, when you're looking at it, you're attuned to the energy of creation. I feel this one chakra takes care of you from all the perspectives, right? Which makes it, that's the reason why it is so potent also.
That is why it is called the Raja Yantra. If you talk, look back at the narratives around all the yantras, Shiva made 64 yantras and presented it to humankind. And Parvati says, what did you do for me? So he says, okay, I'll give you the blueprint from where I made all these yantras. All these 64 yantras can be extracted from this one blueprint that I'm giving you. And he gives her the Shri Yantra. And that's why it is so powerful, and that's why it's also so sacred.
In Devi Mahatmyam, they speak of Kali, Lalita Chapur Sundari, and one more.
There's Kali, Durga,
yes.
and Lalita.
Yes. Yeah. So they speak of Durga, Kali, and Lalita Chapur Sundari as distinct forms, right? Now, when I look at it, no matter what path you take, at the end, you are awakening the divine feminine.
Yes.
So, at the end, if the end goal is that, then where lies the difference? If
you look at Durga, that's more of a very external aggression. Kali is more of the inner work that you have to do to destroy your own internal impulses. If you look at their different fights with the different asuras. So, Durga's work was more external. Kali is more internal work, and Kali is ultimately the most fierce. There is nothing more fierce than Kali. And Lalita is on the other side of the spectrum, where it's just softness, it's just gentleness, it's just beauty. So these are all aspects that women have to face in their lives, and which we embody at different stages. Even in a single day, we go through our Durga phase, our Kali phase, and our Lalita phase. So that is what the Devi Mahatmya is trying to tell us, in short. That these are the manifestations that a woman puts across.
So does it also mean that according to, my core nature, I can be attracted to one particular deity and then follow that path because it would be more aligned to who I am, right?
Yes. But typically what I have seen is that the more soft people are attracted towards the Ugra Devatas, and the more fierce people have like an attraction towards Lalita, because that is how we are trying to complete the circle and try to fill in what is lacking in us.
Okay, so any last thing that you think or you're able to download that Ma is trying to tell us, anything that she would like to put out in the world? Anything, any message?
Since we live in a time of positive affirmations, and we are always looking at something in a language which is not even native to us, how about we all embrace a line from the Markandeya Purana, from the Argala Stotram, which is very simple, easy to remember, and so potent, which we can all use in our lives. As a positive affirmation, you say it in the morning, first thing in the morning, last thing in the night, so that your brain registers it, your subconscious mind also kind of understands it and embraces it completely. Rupam dehi, jayam dehi, yasho dehi, dvisho jahi. If there is one affirmation that can cover all the bases, this is the one. Because you're asking for beauty, not just physical beauty, but the beauty of the aura of Lalita herself, which transcends the physical realm. Jayam, which means I want victory over everything that I put my hands into. Only because I'm on the right path. But again, I keep saying, not with arrogance, but with utmost humility. Yasho, meaning success, yashas, in whatever that is that we want to achieve. And finally, to keep all the negativity at bay. Visho Jahi. So I think if everyone starts to chant this as their affirmation in a language which we know from our DNA in Sanskrit, it's so much more beautiful than doing positive affirmations in a non-native language.
It was an absolutely profound conversation with you, Vanitha ma'am. I think, I started as a novice. I literally had no idea about Sri Vidya and Sri Chakra before before the whole conversation of this podcast came up. And I think within the conversation, you kind of matured me into understanding Maya, singularity, and so many other stuff. It has been an absolute delight having this conversation with you. Thank you so much. And I really, really would like to host you again for some other topic. Maybe we can delve deeper into Maya. Right?
Or the Sri Yantra, because that itself is something that many people are curious about and very little knowledge exists out there. So perhaps that's something that we can do, or we can combine the two things.
Absolutely.
It's been a genuine pleasure. Your questions were truly very thought-provoking. And I think this has been my favorite podcast till date. And thank you for the team. I really appreciate the fact that you've taken the trouble to do all of this and to share the knowledge of Shakti. And I would like to close with a prayer from a Vedic text, the Rig Veda to be specific. And it's from the Sri Suktam. It's a blessing which invokes an abundance of all things enriching for everyone who's listening or who's watching.
Beautiful. Sure.
Om Shrivarchasvamaayushyamarogyama vidhachobhamanam mahiyate dhanyam dhanam pashum bahuputra labham shatasamvatsaram dirghamayuhu. Shri Matre Namaha.
Thank you so much. Loved every bit of it. Thank you. And I think I literally before starting the podcast, even last night, and in fact today morning also, I was like, aaj bahut bhari bharkam podcast. I sat in my meditation and I was like, I just surrendered it to Ma. I was like, this is for you. Let the questions flow, whatever you want the world to know, just take over me and then just let it flow. So if this was good enough, I'm happy.
Thank you so much once again. Thank you.
And to all of you who have stayed till the end, then I can only say one thing, that Devi really wanted you to watch this podcast. Maybe this is your entry to the whole idea of Sri Vidya and Lalita Tripura Sundari. So please, if you found this very profound and insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. And if you feel that this can be a great podcast for someone who might be at their low level and this can help them out, please don't forget to share it with them. We will be back again with a very interesting guest and another exciting episode very soon. Stay tuned.